It's a very good topic because people tend to want to focus on the disability, the limitation that people ostensibly have. And that, if you like, kind of just takes up all of the energy and oxygen. But the reality is that people with disabilities are fundamentally people first. And so the question is not really, oh, what do I want to do with my disability? The question is fundamentally, what was I born for? What is it that I want to do with my life? What would be happy, make me happy? What would be fulfilling? And of course, how to make sense of one's life. Life is as confusing for people with disabilities as is for anyone else, because life's inherently confusing. So the questions are really universal. Even if people can't articulate the questions, it doesn't mean they aren't important questions for people. So just because someone can't say, oh, well, I am unhappy, or I'm confused, or I'm perplexed by life, doesn't mean it's not perplexing. And so when you start to pay attention to the normal existential questions that affect all human beings, you begin to see, well, these actually apply to all people, and including people with disabilities. And so the question is, how might they apply? And when you think about that, you find instantly almost that everyone's life is different. That the fact that they share a disability really doesn't make much of a significance really in their life, just like your hair color might not make much difference. Disability has about the same kind of significance. That the big questions are you doing and living a life that is personally fulfilling? And in this sense, distinctly fulfilling to the person. And so the answer to that question can't be the answer that someone else has. It has to be an answer that really resonates for that person. So the interesting questions really around fulfillment are, who is this person? What makes them distinctive and in what ways? And it can be very simple things that bring happiness. It isn't that it has to be complex things. It can be very simple and inexpensive things that really bring great happiness and great joy to people. And similarly, the things that produce great unhappiness may be simple and very uncomplicated. And so in this sense, the challenge is always, of course, to pay attention to the detail. Like, who is a person is the central question. And what are the facets of who this person is? And again, there may be a tendency to say all disabled people are this, that, or the other, in a way that would just lead us to kind of overgeneralizing, when the detail of happiness will be very particular. And you can just see how cranky people get when it's, they have to eat food that they don't particularly fancy, or that they have to do an activity that's not to their liking, or that they, are put in a circumstance that they'd rather not be in. And you begin to realize that one person's joy is somebody else's affliction, really. And whether some people like sport, that's great if you like sport, but if you hate sport, then all sporting events become a kind of torment. And similarly, if you like quiet and solitude, noisy, busy places are vexation and distressing and so on. So in this sense, finding the detail of people's life and being ever open to what that detail is allows us to understand people much better. And of course, if you understand people, you can be more useful to them. But when you think you understand people, when you think that you are on top of it all, then you fall victim to judgments about people that are not buttressed by actual knowledge of the person. And one of the things we find, again, not just with people with disabilities, but certainly a lot with people with disabilities, is people are comfortable relying on kind of stereotypes or that sort of thing, because they don't have to think, they don't have to pay attention, they simply, already have their convenient conclusions. And, but when you pay attention to the real underlying person, then all kinds of things become very relevant. For instance, people have inborn purposes in their life that are distinct to them. And so their life will kind of gravitate to those kind of purposes, whatever those purposes are. And, you know, the purposes may be a bit mysterious to the person as well as to people that know them, but yet they may reveal themselves over time. For instance, there would be people that are very sensitive about their autonomy, that their autonomy is very important to them, that they sort of like to be captain of their own ship and don't really take to others having too much say and so on. Well, for that person, they're not going to be happy with people that don't respect their autonomy. And there's going to be friction, and they're going to be very difficult. And so many people that are declared to be difficult are being mishandled because people aren't starting with respect for the way they want to go at things. And when we understand the way that people want to go at things, we can be happier in their company, and they can be happier in ours, because we understand who the person is, what they're like, what their sense of how they want to do things is. For instance, another thing that's very kind of significant in fulfillment for people would be simply, what is it that they're actually attracted to? What is it that kind of energizes them, excites them, evokes some kind of passion and interest, and what doesn't? And you're going to get nowhere with people when you're getting them doing things that they find intrinsically unappealing, unattractive. Yet, if it were something that is compelling and interesting to people, they could spend hours doing something that for them is absolutely fascinating, interesting, and so on. That is, when you think about it, then a kind of puzzle, because you have to kind of work all that out. And that, of course, isn't something you can do in a half an hour or a day or months, because it's a constant unfolding of who the person is. Even when we use the term person, we tend to want to use it as if it's a fixed reality, when the personhood of people is constantly evolving. One just has to reflect on one's own life to see how priorities have changed over time, and how what seemed to be captivating at one point is now, not interesting any longer or whatever. And so who is the person is a dynamic kind of reality, and an evolving one. For instance, many people with disabilities have limited experiences in life because they've been overprotected, restricted. People have had very low expectations for them. So they tend to kind of think about them in terms of what do they enjoy in their extremely limited existence. Now, if you begin to enrich their existence by adding things daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, then you will see all different sides of people that would never have been revealed in previous environments, because these are additional kind of inputs almost into people's life, and many of them will create kind of aspects of the person no one has ever seen before. Because all we have seen is what we're going on, not what's truly possible for people. So this gets us to another aspect of personal fulfillment, which is the idea of potential. That people have really three different kinds of potential that we ought to be attentive to, that would have bearing on the question of ultimate personal fulfillment. And the first would be the potential that's already shown itself. The people, for instance, may have a great affinity for music, and that's already seen. But even with that, we know there could be more. So what has been done with that potential would be what we've seen so far. But that could be the seed of a greater potential. From one musical interest may lead to other musical interests. And you can see that again in the careers of many musicians. They start somewhere and they go other places with it. And similarly, for a person with disability, how they want to kind of respond to the challenge of music in their life, and what ultimately kind of becomes their course in life begins from these early signs that music, was of interest to them. So that's potential that's not too much done with it so far. And then there's potential that something has been done with it, so you see more of it. And that would be, if you like, developed potential. But the developed potential isn't really absolute potential. It's a hint yet of what could further be present for the person. But perhaps the one I find most interesting is the idea of hidden potential. And this is potential that's present, latent, but it has not yet revealed itself and may reveal itself only under favorable conditions. In other words, people would be shocked to know that this person or that person was interested in this, did this or that with their life because one had never seen it before. And yet there would be countless examples of people that take up absolutely new interests in their 70s, absolutely new kind of passions in life and so on. And so in this sense, potential doesn't necessarily reveal itself at day one, and one can almost assume most of who people are will still be hidden in many, many ways, because people themselves are surprised at themselves. If you asked many people, are you a bit surprised by how your life turned out? Most people would answer yes, because they weren't expecting all kinds of things in life and would never have guessed that, oh, I would do this or do that at some point in my life. In a sense, there's an old joke that life is what happens while you're planning. And in that sense, life unfolds in ways that are unplanned, but nonetheless show great dimensions of who people are. Another thing that's kind of interesting about fulfillment is that, that people have needs. And when one's needs are met, the outcome is always the same, and that is that people experience some degree of satisfaction, contentment, some kind of temporary harmony with their world, because their need is met. So when you're tired and you can get some sleep, then you're a little bit more cheerful when you wake up, because you actually needed the sleep, and sleep works. If you're hungry and you've skipped a few meals and you're really quite hungry and you eat, well, that'll satisfy. That won't satisfy forever, but it does have intrinsic satisfaction. And so it's a very big clue to what is happiness, because if you don't get what you need, then the outcome is also predictable, which is some manner of distress. Distress comes about because it is what we do when we aren't getting what we need. If for some reason you were choking, you had something that you were choking on, you would immediately become distressed, because the panic about not being able to breathe would produce distress. It's that. So the more acute the distress, of course, the more difficult, but distress is always correlated to getting what one needs. And a good example of this is just how many people with disabilities are deeply and profoundly bored with their lives. And of course, when you're bored, you try to do something with the boredom, and the boredom is distressing to people. And until the boredom is addressed, people will stay distressed. And people will say, oh, they have cranky behavior or something, but they don't. They don't have behavior without cause. They are bored. The boredom needs to be engaged. And when you find things that are engaging to people, then the boredom disappears. And people are actually kind of fascinated with what they are doing and stop being difficult. So in this sense, the fact that we can meet needs, we can engage potential, we can seek the drivers and the purposes that people have inborn in them, all reveal that you can partner with people around the question of personal fulfillment. It's not something, oh, well, it's out of my hands. No, one can become in sync with people by constantly paying attention to almost, if you like, the elements of personhood that are working for people and not working for people. And of course, you can see people whose lives change radically when the right things are in their life, and how quickly distress and unhappiness builds when they are placed in the wrong life. So in this sense, the question ultimately with personal fulfillment is, what is the right life for any of us? And of course, if the answer to that was always straightforward, then we would not have philosophers, we would not have great novels, we would not have great theater, because this is the soulful kind of search for purpose, meaning, and happiness in people's lives that is an ever-present challenge. No matter what your life was like yesterday, new issues may arise today. So in this sense, life isn't always easy, and personal fulfillment isn't always easy. But what we can have confidence in is that people can find contentment and happiness, because so many people have. And again, I start out by saying, much of what is fundamental and possibly profound to people might be very simple. It's amazing how many simple little things in life are things that people find great satisfaction in. This idea that happiness is some grand thing, that you have to do some kind of over the top and extravagant thing to be happy, it would not be consistent with human experience. But it is important, whether the thing be modest or extravagant, that it be the right thing for people, that it resonates with their identity, with who they are, and that care be taken then to do what we can to have people in the situations in which they thrive, and to not be unwittingly making people unhappy by placing them in situations or encouraging situations that really are not to their liking, not to their really kind of in accord with their purposes in life. And to do that, one has to begin with a kind of respect for the person, and a willingness to look past the symptoms on the surface to understand what are the underlying things that are at work in a person's life, and to partner with people. And of course, creating the right relationship with the person makes that possible, and creating the wrong relationship with the person makes everything much more difficult. Because people need to be in the kind of honorable partnership with the people in their life. That is one of the things that brings happiness to people, when people around them are the right way for them. And when people aren't, then of course you get all kinds of difficulties develop. So my view would be, with the personal fulfillment question, is that one can, at least in theory, partner with people and work towards personal fulfillment as a very practical matter. But again, one has to do it differently each time, and the challenges will arise from who is the person, and also to some extent what is the time and place in which we take up these challenges. People may simply be starting in a very unfortunate circumstance, and you have to create more fortunate circumstances along the way, and whatnot, but that's true for all of us. And so in this sense, fulfillment is a kind of ongoing project. It's not something, we did fulfillment back in March and it's all done now. We're now moved on to something else. Personal fulfillment is an endless question. People are worried about their happiness even in their last days, their last minutes, because it is part of the kind of mystery of life that we want something from life. And in this sense, you'll notice I haven't been talking about disability. I've been talking about the universal reality and hunger for people to do something with their lives that works for them. And when we start taking people with disabilities more seriously on that score, you'll find that we do much better. Of course, if you pay attention to the details of people's life, you'll find that, at least in many parts of people's life, they have found something that at least engages their potential, maybe not to an ultimate sense, but certainly in many ways. For instance, I do know people, for instance, that for whom their religion has been important to them. There's a gentleman that spoke at one of your conferences recently that, he's clearly, one of the things that's important to his life is his religion. And not everyone is interested in formal religion, but people are interested in things that they find meaningful and purposeful for them, in a sense that is their framework of religion. But in this case, this gentleman, in that part of his life, is very happy. Another good example is when people get a real home of their own. When they've always lived in others' homes rather than one of their own making, their own design, the kind of home that suits them like a glove, then you'll see them flourish relative to their own home. And again, time and again, when people take their need for home seriously and partner with them to find and create the kind of home and lifestyle that works for them, that would be another kind of example. A third would be the kind of relationships that people take to and the kinds of relationships they don't take to. And again, finding the right kind of people that are a good match or a good kind of good companions in life. Not everyone fits the bill. And in that sense, some people are really much better company, at least at a particular time in your life. And so your relationship needs can change, of course, through life, but finding the relationships that suit you. And of course, you'll find people with disabilities who have all kinds of people they get on well with, and other people they don't want any time with. So finding the right people happens again and again. And you can see the difference when it is the right person. It has a quite different feel to it. Another example would be people that have found the work that suits them. First of all, to have work. There'd be people that want to have work and accomplishment and to be like other people and to make a contribution. And again, there'd be so many examples of people who have found jobs that really, I mean, there's a mother I know, and she was telling me one of her daughters who has a disability, there too, and she works part-time, 3 days a week or something like that. But on the days that she doesn't work, you can't get her out of bed in the mornings. It's just like torture. But on the days that she is going to work, she's up at 6:30 dressed and you can hardly contain her. She's eager to get to work. So work has kind of been a light in her life. And yet she isn't a naturally easy person to get up in the morning, but somehow all that fades away when it's the day she goes to the job she likes. So again, these are all simple things, but they are the right things for that person. And so in this sense, right things are the things we need to be looking for, and that will be different from one person to another. And again, it doesn't matter what age you're at, the question's always going to be, is this really a good match for the person? And again, the way to know this is, of course, to know the person. The better we understand people, the better we're going to be at interpreting some of these things and being more helpful. But one never proceeds successfully on the basis of ignorance of the person. And yet, we are all going to have to be very careful to recognize our ignorance of the person and our misreading of the person. That the challenge of, in a sense, the quality of attention that we give to people, because people will show us, but if we're not paying attention, we miss it. But people are showing us constantly what's working for them, what isn't. But if we don't pick up on it, then we'll be less successful. So it's very important to recognize that you can be instructed by people, but you have to be a kind of student of the person and submit to them rather than submit to your view of them. In that sense, we want to, in a sense, fashion people to be the people we'd like them to be, but ultimately that's not going to work. At some point, the final answer has to be what they seem to be built to be, and to somehow find a way to work with that. You've got to remember that services are the people that work in the services, and there would be people that are gifted in any service potentially. And so those people that have a gift for this kind of work could be very useful, but it begins with a kind of wisdom on the part of the agency that we're not here to run a program, in other words, to kind of have a box and fill the box. We're here to kind of go where this person takes us and then fend off the bureaucratic obstacles that arise. So the wisdom of the agency will predict to some extent whether they are able to kind of optimize things for people. So it isn't really a question of the agencies per se, whether they could or they couldn't. They obviously can do some things. But it's a question of have they built the wisdom that leads to good practices around supporting people in their lives. And this is a lot more than just declaring oneself person-centered. In fact, there's been a kind of tsunami of such declarations because the real proof of the person-centeredness is personal success of the person. If we're really successfully person-centered, people are thriving. And when we see people bored, not thriving, trapped, suffering under low expectations, acting up even, then we realize we're not kind of getting to the core of things. So in this sense, the wisdom, there's an old saying, I think it comes from the Old Testament, but it's one that has stayed with me over the years, and that is, the beginning of wisdom is respect for the problem. So when we respect, that it's hard to get a good life, you have to be pretty thoughtful about this, pretty mindful, then we don't go declaring ourselves successful. We declare ourselves as trying very hard, but not necessarily being very successful. So the wisdom is typically revealed in humility, a deep knowledge of the people, a kind of persistence through time, a great attention to kind of the ethics of partnering, a great faith in building vision, or what I call in my writings, imagining better. So these are the kind of ingredients, the wisdom that has to be built. And agencies don't build them as agencies, they build them one person at a time, because not everyone in an agency is going to be useful, simply because they're hired to do the work. So part of it is simply even finding and grooming the right people so that they might do better with it. All of this is very challenging, very demanding. But again, we have seen, quite big differences from one agency to another. And I think the roots of it are in some of these deep insights and values around people. It's not in the top-down managerial approach to people, but rather almost starting from the inside of people out to find the lifestyles that suit them. And lifestyles can be created. They can be made intentional, and one can pursue them. No matter where you begin, there's a place to go. So where you start probably doesn't matter. It's where you get to. And so the progress to get somewhere might be many years with people. But again, when you see people succeed, you realize, oh, this is actually possible. And agencies have often been very helpful in that. Would I have faith, though, that the average agency would do it? Probably not, because they get distracted by other compelling agendas and so on. And it is true that clients are ruining perfectly good programs. Again and again, they're just simply not cooperating with what's been set in place for them. So when you get over that and stop seeing people as ruining your perfectly good program, then they aren't behavior problems anymore. The behavior problem is the agency that has the perfectly good program. So we got to get out of the way of programs and start thinking about one person at a time ways of working. And that's probably been the biggest breakthrough of the last several decades, is the organizations that have found they can do that. Not that it's easy or anything, but they found they can do that such that they don't have a program. They have an ongoing negotiation with the individual, one person at a time, trying to find something that'll work for the person. Yes, there'd be examples almost everywhere. And in this sense, it wouldn't be, again, the agencies. There would be, even in some cases, the corners of some agencies, small subcomponents of agencies that have done very well with it, even though the agency overall has not done well, that subcomponent has. And similarly, you'd find agencies that have, on average, done very well. For instance, you take something as simple as employment. There are agencies that are very good at getting people jobs, and jobs that they stay in and that the people like. These are agencies that when they started out getting people jobs, it was all new to them. But over time, they've gotten much better. And then again, you can find jurisdictions where, for instance, the employment rate for people with disabilities would be, say 70% of people are working, something like that. It's a very high number. But yet you could go to another jurisdiction, another state, and the average numbers would be half of that. So you can see there's a difference because the outcomes are different. And so obviously the state that has better outcomes has better strategies. And how did they get there? And then if you were trying to study how that was done, then you got to go back and identify what were the active ingredients of getting that number up to 70%, for instance. So if you kind of keep that in mind, you'll find that agencies might have a kind of set of gifts or niches in which they do well, but not necessarily on every other thing do they do well. So in this way, like people, agencies may have strengths that have helped people flourish, but only in some dimensions. And in other ways, they're not particularly remarkable. Yet, what they have achieved ought to be recognized as making a difference, but recognizing at the same time other things are left unattended and so on. So they're not as good at that. So in this sense, there's no such thing as a kind of general all-purpose agency. All agencies will have some strengths and some shortcomings. Yeah, again, your level of disability is kind of not the important issue. The important issue is this home arrangement that is helping you thrive. And your disability would be a factor in that possibly, but really the happiness factors are rarely functional only. Because you would say, oh, if I have a limp, I could never be happy. Or if I need help kind of dressing, I could never be happy. But, we all get help with all kinds of things. So happiness isn't on our functional level. I mean, there are some things that we could be unhappy about that way, but the happiness is the engagement of the person and the fullness of their life potential. So in a home life situation, what are the ingredients of home that are meaningful to a particular person? And have people been trying to kind of keep that question alive of, because you could get people a home of their own that's better than what they had, but that may not be the same as saying, are they really fulfilling their true potential in terms of a home? And in this sense, many things may not yet have been attempted or even envisioned that would also be beneficial. So again, we might settle looking backwards, saying, oh, it's better than it was, but not really asking ourselves the real question is not whether it's better than what it was, but could it be yet better? And why that's an important question is the fact that we made it better ought to be a clue to us there's more yet that could be made better. Why? Well, because we can see a before and after in one instance, so we can know that in other aspects there could be better. And it doesn't criticize people because they've taken a few steps in the right direction, but why stop? When you've found steps can make a difference, then keep stepping. Find the steps and stay away from the steps that make very little difference. And all of us have different kind of predilections and priorities relative to home. And one person's home is not going to suit another person. So you've got home as a multifaceted kind of question. If you think of home as a kind of, not just housing or accommodation, but rather where your life is lived out, part of your life at least, then it's all tied up in the bigger question of, is this the kind of life that suits me? And again, it's wonderful because people can help you answer that question. They can show you that something is working, even if, for instance, they're nonverbal, profoundly intellectually disabled. If you can tell they're cranky about something, then that's the beginning of a conversation. So the idea that, and then you find people that are highly verbal that aren't really communicating what they mean. So a lot of words don't necessarily mean that they're communicating. Communicating is when they're in touch, and then we're in touch with what they're in touch with. And so in that way, you know, you can never be sure, but you know, you want to pay attention.